I'm going to show you how I made this landing scene. I came up with this idea after watching Andor, and while I'm not a big Star Wars fan, I grew up at a time when Star Wars level CGI was only possible at ILM. It's fun to think that making something like this can be done at home, so let's get on with it. First thing I did was to build a U-wing. It's symmetrical, which helps speed up the process, but at this point I didn't have a grasp on what the project was actually going to be, which meant I spent a lot of time on things that wouldn't likely be seen. But that's okay, it was still fun. I broke the ship into a few containers so that I could turn them on and off as the poly counts increased. As you can see, there's nearly 4 million. Most of it comes from the greebles. I downloaded a free greeble pack, which is linked below, but some of them are quite detailed. The way I built the engines was also heavy, but that's my own fault for not planning it out well enough before starting. Textures are mostly put together by hand, but some are from Blender Kit. The exhaust texture is a campfire on loop and duplicated onto a cone mesh, copied and offset to give it some randomness. It works well seeing it from distance, but I spent too much time on it to be honest. All the extra geometry I expected to apply to displacement didn't end up making much of a difference overall. The preamble, as I call it, is my Fuzzy Balls introduction. All of my videos somehow morph into that logo, but I had to render it twice because I screwed up the animation the first time. The Death Star is a UV sphere that just has a bunch of extrusions and insets. The textures were created using Displacement X, which is linked below. It creates a bunch of rectangles that can then be applied as a displacement or a bump map. I use similar maps for the emissions for the interior lights. The asteroids are created using the Blender Rock Generator with a Blender Kit texture. I think there's 20 different models to give it some variety. Each one had its own randomly rotated animation, just done by hand and extrapolated linearly so they repeat. The asteroids are particles on a circle using weight paint to force them to be more organized, where the larger ones are on the outskirts and the finer ones closer to the planet, just like in real life. The planet itself is a sphere with a bunch of wave textures overlapping with a hint of animated distortion. In the first scene, the ship is animated on a curve. A few noise modifiers were added to give it some wobble. The background is a 16K space HDR, but even at such a high resolution, it's still blurry when stretched around the entire scene. In the future, I intend to composite the backgrounds in afterwards so that they retain their high resolution. The portal was also done in Blender. It's a simple expanding circle with a few animated procedural wave and noise textures. Most of the work here was done in Nuke. As I'm still new to Nuke, none of this is advice. This is just how I managed to make things work. The script is pretty simple. You read in the background, merge in the portal with a few color tweaks, overlay the ship with a few frames of time echo to give it some smear, and then add noise and lens flares, chromatic aberration in the vignette. It's pretty simple. The planet was made in Blender. It's not difficult, but went through a few variations until I settled on the final version. The first sphere is the ground texture, all procedural. Color ramps define the ground, the water, and the mountains. The next sphere define the clouds. Cloud texture is actually a NASA satellite picture with some tweaks to remove how obvious that is. And then an atmosphere is on top of that. The ship was animated on a curve with some noise modifiers just like every other scene. In Nuke, it was nearly identical to the first scene as well. Background, planet, ship, camera effects, done. The flyover scene came out better than I hoped. The ground is just a large plane sculpted to give it some height, and a particle system to place the trees. The trees are actually alpha cards, 2D pictures with alpha channels for transparency. This speeds up the render immensely but has its drawbacks. They don't react to light correctly and can't move or sway in the wind. But from this height and during a sunset, they work great. The sky is just the Blender Nishida sun. The water is a large plane with some noise and color green to match the color of the planet I chose from space. The ship again was animated on a curve, as was the camera, with noise modifiers on both to give it that personal touch. The landing pad is a simple version of what's actually in the next scene. In Nuke, the only real changes to the script were to track the sun and the engines for positions of lens flares and distortions. I used a gizmo I downloaded called X-Distort, but really don't understand it quite yet. I got it to do what I wanted, but not as well as I hoped. You can only really see it when it's against the sky, and it's not very good. The landing scene contains a bunch of downloaded assets from Sketchfab. Ship and camera, again, are animated on a curve. I wanted this place to be alive with a bunch of workers and robots when I first envisioned it, but the reality of working on an RTX 3080 is that things need to be planned out well in advance, only having 10 gigs of RAM. The scene was just too detailed at this point to add much more than I already had, even after breaking up the rendering into layers. So I settled on having a static person model just welding the ship in the back, just animating the brightness of a light, and a second model to act as the landing pad air marshal. He's a Sketchfab model of a Star Wars Rebel put into Mixamo with a few basic animations. Blender's NLA editor animates his walking. I had to add a head mesh manually to the model, creating his wands and animating his arms. It's proved to be a bit tricky overall, but after a few tutorials it made sense. Won't say it was all fun though. There's a small smoke simulation to create the landing puff of dust. Working with Blender's simulations are just rage-inducing. I had more trouble with baking smoke than anything else on this project. You make one tweak and it's just gone. Change one value and attempt to rebake and, well, imagine putting your cake into the oven and it bakes for an hour, but when you open it up, the cake's just gone. That's Blender smoke simulation. It's truly something marvelous when it works, but it's also something marvelous in how it doesn't. Lights were tracked in Nuke to add the lens flares just like all the other scenes. All the music and sounds were taken from Freesound, Pixabay, Zapsplat, and the YouTube audio library. So in the end, did I have fun? What did I learn? What was challenging? This took me 2.5 months, and nearly all of it was actually fun. The last landing scene was tacked on only when the final edit proved to feel too abrupt though. Much of the project was designed to figure out the basics in Nuke, to be honest. I learned why render passes are produced and how powerful they can be, but only if you plan ahead. The time that can be saved in post compared to a full re-render can be substantial. I just like learning something new. In Blender, the NLA was also something new, and I can see its potential, but likely won't be using it much until I get deeper into character animation. I need to figure out how to better use the depth pass. No matter how much I read into it and tried different things, I get this weird stippled pattern where the depths are overlaid. It works fine, but it feels like the depth resolution just isn't precise enough or something, but I don't know. It can be blurred and hidden after the Z-merge, but it's still visible if you look. And you should never anti-alias a depth pass because you'll end up with partial depth values, which A, don't make any sense, and B, just lead to more issues later on. I also need to dig a bit deeper into color spaces and how to streamline them when moving between Blender, Nuke, and Davinci Resolve. Color space itself makes sense, but how to configure it in Blender seems to be an issue for me. Once I get the footage into Davinci, it's always a chore to get it to output properly. Blender 5 supposedly will support ACES CG and a bit better, which hopefully will make moving between all these programs more streamlined. But that's it. Here once again is the final scene.